¿Y cómo verificamos si me oye? Hello, everyone can hear me? Yeah? Perfect.
Yes.
Y ese... No hay cámara de momento. No digo, pero para que mi pantalla se vea de arriba se iba a hacer a través de esa. Entonces sí necesitamos que ese se conecte, pero bueno. Okay, we're solving some issues with the screen, but we're going to start just with the voice, and in a few minutes we will have the... Ya tengo las dos, sí.
Ah, ¿tienes dos HDMI?
No, sí, pero no la pilla porque ya son tres. ¿Me explico?
Claro, claro.
Okay, I know this format of the class is a little bit anticlimactic in terms of discussing things and sharing thoughts, but I encourage you to please interrupt me and speak. We have a microphone here and Giuseppe is going to be around, so we can do it as efficiently as we can, because classes are a lot more interesting when we have a dialogue and not only I speak, because I don't have too much to say compared to your thoughts. So I'm going to start a little bit more with a small talk about the tools, the software tools that we use, but not from a technical point of view, but more from a, let's say, a conceptual point of view. There's always discussions around which is the best tool, the easiest tool, and then which tool you should choose to be able to do fantastic stuff in just 1 week of working and learning. And I think that discussion in that, enclose the discussion in those parameters is a little bit too simplistic. So I'm going to try to take the discussion to another level on why do I choose to use Blender instead of other tools. No? I'm going to talk in first person because it's just my personal opinion. It's not an official opinion of anyone, but I think this can promote a little bit of discussion and thinking about why do we use the tools that we use. So my first thought around this is how tools shape the way we are and how tools shape the things we do. It's not only that a tool is efficient and fast to do NURBS modeling, and then we can model this stuff very fast. That's the top thing. But in the underlayer, let's say, how the tool is designed, which options do we have, etc., has a lot of impact. Let me turn my mic off.
¿Sí?
Yeah? Okay. Esto no sé qué es. Okay, so you see up there my screen, so everything is set up. Perfect. So I was saying, the tool is not only a way to express ourselves, but the tool also shape how we think stuff, how we find solutions, how the paths that we follow to find a geometrical solution to a specific problem is very related to the options that we have when we model stuff. And it's not only about modeling or designing stuff. I think this discussion is a little bit in a higher level, and it's around all the tools that we use, no? So how the tool shape us is imprinted in the code itself, in how the tool is designed.
And normally, those are decisions from the people that designed the tool. So we also need to learn a little bit on who did this tool and why they did it, and what is their intention on bringing us that tool, right? That's let's say, what I said to start my point on why do I use Blender. If the tool has a lot of influence on me, on how I will express myself, then if the tool is designed by someone else and I don't know the motivations there, I already have some limits that I didn't choose, right? Those limits normally tend to be not very explicit, but in a long term, they will show up and they will force you to go in certain direction, either you want it or not. So choosing a tool where you know who wrote that tool, why they wrote it, and that you have access to all the process from start writing the code itself, the people that is writing the tool, they publish the motivations on why they are doing stuff, and they not only communicate that, but they ask you, what do you need? Why do you need that? Which is the best way to achieve that? So having a software that is written and designed by a community of people, an open community, at the end will give a lot of freedom to the users. Not only in terms of free, as gratis, as you don't pay, but freedom in terms of choosing the path and the way that you use the tool, right? So that, for me, is one of the main reasons why Blender, and in general free software, it's important for designers. We can extend this discussion a lot, but I don't want to go too far away. It's just a kind of a first taste of a class that we're going to have about license and patents later on Fab Academy. But it's something that I think you should think when you choose to spend a lot of time on learning a tool. Not only think about the outcome that you can get from the tool, but also this surrounding, let's say, features of a tool, okay? Well, having said that, I'm going to talk a little bit about Blender and the history of Blender and why do I think it's a lot more open and a lot more convenient for people that wants to express themselves than other tools. Blender started as an in-house tool. You have, all of you have this page, I think, in some way or another, you will have access to this page in the documentation, in a link that Santi pastes to you. And here are links to different things that we will discuss during the class, okay? These are more notes for myself, but I like to share them. But don't think that this is a documentation for the class, okay? It's just some notes that you can follow references and read it. So here we have a link about the history of Blender. Blender is not a product of a company, okay? It's a software built by people that's not making money of it. What do I mean? They live working on, they make enough money to live, but they are not generating revenue from Blender, right? So Blender started as an in-house tool for a studio in, I think, in Netherlands in the 90s, 94, as far as I remember. And for some reasons, they stopped developing that software. And one of the authors, one of the developers of the tool was like a little bit sad of the tool falling behind and stopping its development. And he wanted to open the tool as an open source tool to continue development with help of other people. Not as a business, but as an act of a personal decision. The problem is that the code was owned by the company that paid for its development. So in the 90s, there wasn't Kickstarter stuff, but this guy came out with the idea of crowdfunding money to buy that code. In fact, I think that's the first crowdfunding event that's registered in modern history that started with this concept of that later became Goteo, Kickstarter, all those platforms that allow you to do crowdfunding. He managed to get the money from a lot of people. He bought the code and he put it outside under an open license. Okay, he licensed this software as a free software. And he also started working a lot on building a way to get funds so he can keep people working on that software and earning money to live from it. Also, he promoted the software so a community that start using it start also contributing code. So a lot of people that did animation modeling stuff that also knew a little bit of coding started contributing on the Blender code base. That was, I think, at the end around 2000, 2002, when it started fully as an open source project that started working. So we're talking about less than 20 years. And it started as a really basic software. It was very difficult to model anything. It was very difficult to do animation because it was a very limited and small platform software. But still, a lot of people like me use it since that time just because we believe in the idea of a code that was built by the community. So even if I took like 3 days doing an animation that my friends did in half an hour in 3D Max, I was there like clicking my stuff because I love the idea. And I started writing some code to contribute when I can, etc. So like me, there was a lot of people around the world that start doing that. And at the beginning, it wasn't so fast. Development was growing and improving a little bit every month, every year. But at some point, the community grew so much that there was a lot of contributors all over the world, and there was a lot of people willing to give money to the foundation so they can start hiring developers in a permanent basis. No? There's a lot of people like me that pays like €5, €10 a month to the foundation, so we keep Blender running. And they started to grow so fast that even big companies started to put some money because maybe they will use the tool or because they want to appear in the page saying they are giving money to a non-profit foundation, whatever. But they started putting some money on it. Some studios started migrating to using Blender because Blender is a lot more focused on animation at the beginning and rendering. So there's a community of architects that use Blender. There's a lot of studios that are starting to use Blender to do movies. And then the Blender people came out with an idea that was a mixed idea between how to get money, but also how to get ideas on where this software should go, which is the direction where we need to develop tools and features, new features. So between this community, they made a small contest and promote the idea to do open movies. The concept of an open movie was we are going to choose a subject, we are going to write some script, and we are going to build between the community models, scenarios, props, whatever we need to do that animation movie. And we're going to do it in an open way so everyone can learn from the process. But we are also going to sit down a developer and a people doing animation side by side so they work together. So if the animator or the modeler needs a tool to do these kind of things, then the developer will try to integrate that into Blender as a way to develop a software that's more close to what the real user is needing. That experiment worked really nice. There was a lot of people all over the world that in that time, we still watch movies on CDs and DVDs. So a lot of people like me bought the DVD on advance you buy the DVD when they start making the movie, and you pay for it with the agreement that you will receive a DVD when the movie is finished. No? So maybe normally it's a process of 6 months because they get enough money to pay. I don't remember the first movie, but I think there was like 6 people for 6 months to do the movie and to develop the software during that process. And in each movie they made, they choose a subject that was important in terms of development for the software. So for example, a movie had a lot of, how do you say this in English? A movie was very focused on effects, adding special effects on already taken footage. So they use that movie to develop the compositor of Blender, no? And the node system of Blender. Then they made a movie where everyone has a lot of hair and there was a lot of grass in the scenario. So they develop a lot the particle system, etc. No, they were choosing subjects of the movies so they can develop that aspect of the software. And in each time they do the same process. They gather money by selling the movie on advance, paying people, and one nice thing is all the people that made those movies were from people from the community. So there was a voting, and the community voted for the best members, the more skilled members, and they, as a prize, had the option to go to Netherlands and work in this movie during 6 months with a small salary, but enough to live during those 6 months. No? So as you can see, I'm telling all this story for you to feel this way. I feel Blender like something that's very close to me because of this, because it's like a project, an idea that you start with your friends and you start doing it, and suddenly it grows so big that it becomes a really important tool in the world. No? But it has these humble beginnings that show that it can be done. No? Okay, so in the page, there's a lot of links. There's a link, for example, for Blender Foundation, where you can read a little bit on how the foundation is structured and how it works. And if you're convinced by my speech or by what they say, you can do some donations to the foundation, etc. But it's an interesting thing, not only because it is a foundation, but because it is a not so common way of developing software in this world, in the world of design and animation and stuff like that. Because you know a lot of open source software for servers, you know a lot of open source software around Linux, etc. But Blender is like a strange piece of software and creation in this world. And it's a very interesting success story, let's say. Then there's a link to community where you can find not only a lot of things that we are talking right now, but a lot of tutorials, a lot of work, a lot of places where you can learn, a lot of resources in general. And normally, since this community has grown from zero, from ground up, let's say, it's a very friendly community. So it's very easy to ask for help and ask, how do I do this? Why is Blender not working in my setup? Why my particles are not how I want it to be, etc. And there's a lot of forums, etc., that normally people is very willing to answer. Okay, another interesting part, just to finish this idea around why Blender is important, or what makes Blender different from other tools, not only from a technical point of view, is the development process. No? If you go to blender.org, you can see a lot of things around Blender, but you can also see this part, the developer's blog. And it's not only a blog where they publish what they are doing, it's also a full system where you can see what each developer is doing, why they are doing it, why the conclusions of every meeting, and you can also give your opinion there and start pushing Blender in the direction that you want. Obviously, there's going to be discussion because maybe you want this and other people want that, etc. You're always on the right to fork Blender and start your own idea. And since that happens a lot of people want different things from the software. They develop a very big system of add-ons for Blender and open an API in Python. So it's very easy to write your own Blender, let's say. You can write an add-on that change completely how Blender behaves or adds functionalities without modifying the base code. So that also opens a big window that we're going to explore later of new stuff happening in Blender from different communities. No? As an example, for example, here they are doing some work around what they call a project that they call everything nodes. You know that the concept of nodes as a unity that as a unit that can modify information that has an input and an output, or several input or several outputs, and it modifies the information that flows through it, is used a lot in a lot of softwares for composition, for like Grasshopper, like a lot of softwares use this concept of nodes because it's very handy to do a lot of tasks that sometimes is difficult to do just writing code. And then they started with this idea that everything that you can do inside Blender should be doable with nodes. And they are working in that project in different stages. And the stage that they are working right now is related to modeling through nodes. And the cool thing is that they publish everything that they do. And so you can read why they are doing this stuff, how they are doing it, you can give your opinion, et cetera, et cetera. So the development process is always open and it's always based on the necessities that the community push as more important. Okay, this, for example, is a post around using nodes to create particle systems like grass, leaves for trees, etc. And with that excuse, they are doing a new movie, a new open movie, I think is this one with the mushroom. Now I am a little bit disconnected from the latest movies they are doing, but I think they are doing a movie that's more focused on this kind of development. And I think I've seen a link someplace here, but you can search for it by yourself later. Okay, so more or less, that's what makes Blender unique in the world of software for 3D modeling, okay? Not only the technical features, but the development model, the community model. Here is the movie. I already checked it. Sprites Fright. Now, this is a movie that they are developing right now, and they have already some concepts, some ideas, some scriptings done. And the cool thing is that you can see all the development process, not only of the movie, how they model stuff, how they animate stuff, etc., but the developers working on the features that are going to be used in the movie. Okay. Later you can check it out, and it's a really interesting thing to see all the process from. You cannot see how Autodesk is developing Mesh Mixer and understand why they are doing it this way because it's a closed model. And in this case, you can dig into every detail on how they are doing it. Okay, as the last example on cool things that happen with this model, there's this guy called Pablo Dobarro. He's a Spanish guy that's very good modeling and sculpting. You know, ZBrush, I can imagine, this kind of technique that you can sculpt, digitally sculpt. Normally it's done with a pressure sensitive tablet, so you can do a very intuitive way of modeling. No? So this guy was very good on this, and he started writing some code because he wanted to for Blender. And he was so good that the Blender Foundation hired him immediately, and now since, I don't know, 6 months ago, he's working inside the Blender studios, developing software for the sculpt mode of Blender. And he publishes videos like this almost every week. And he's pushing the sculpting system of Blender to a very, very high standard, very fast. In fact, we are all afraid that Autodesk will try to hire him for a lot of money because he don't like the competition that Blender is becoming against ZBrush. You can search Pablo Dobarro on the internet and then you will find a lot of work that he's doing. It's just an example for me on how young people that is really creative and want to share what they do can find place in this kind of projects. Because all his work right now is integrated in Blender and it's a free software that everyone can use for free. No? So I think I want my daughters to do this kind of things. No? I don't want them to work in Autodesk, but I want them to be able to do what they like to do in a project that can share what they do with this simplicity and this kind of things. No? Okay, now I end up with this free software speech, and let's start with Blender. The class that we're going to have around free software licenses, patents, etc. I'm not sure when it is scheduled, but then we will discuss deeply which are the differences and how you can manage and use those licenses depending on what you want to do. So I'm not going to go right now there because I have here a point talking about the difference between free and proprietary software. We're going to go into that subject in the other class, okay? Let me see. Okay, we still have some time. So Blender, it's a really complex software, as any software designed to do this kind of tasks tend to have a lot of options. Visually, they are really cluttered. You can see buttons everywhere. You can see stuff everywhere. So it's very easy to be afraid of it and think, no, learning that will cost me 6 months just to understand how to move inside. So what I will try to do today, that normally I try to do this in the introduction class, is to give you a full overview of what you can do. Obviously, I'm not going to go deep in each subject, but just that you know what Blender can do as a global idea, and try to guide you in starting to do very simple stuff, but in a way that my intention is for you to lose the fear of start tickling inside Blender, no? And point you to a lot of resources where if you're interested in this kind of stuff, you can go by yourself. We are not going to teach you Blender in Fab Academy as a software that you will master. It's just an option, and we want to open the door for you to understand that that option is there, and you can learn it by yourself very easily, or you can search for specialized Blender training later if you think that it's worth the case, okay? So let's open Blender. I use a little bit of an older version because 2 reasons. The latest version in my old laptop that runs Linux, etc., normally crashes. I don't know why, and I have to check why, and I didn't have the time yet. And also because they do changes so fast that as a teacher it's very difficult to follow all the changes. And then if I work with a little bit of an older version, I do less stupid things during the class, because normally with the latest version, I feel like I don't know where things are because they move it every 2 months, no? So this version of Blender is not the same that you will have installed if you install it just now, but it's very similar. There are a few things that have changed, and what we are going to do today is going to be done the same way in the latest version, okay? So first of all, Blender is designed for you to customize it. So they offer you a first setup, but Blender can be changed completely in the way it looks, in the way it behaves, etc. So I'm going to show you a little bit of those things so you can manage to understand how it is organized. Blender is, in fact, has an internal window system, no? Like a windowing system like Windows or Mac has different ways of managing your windows. And it's what is called a non-overlapping window system. That means that normally windows don't overlap. They don't go on top of each other, but side by side. For example, if you do this, you can see that these are two windows and I'm resizing them, right? The left window has a 3D view and the right window has a couple of windows also. The top one has a list with objects and the bottom has a lot of buttons, right? But you can change the disposition of these windows, the amount of windows that you want to have in your view, and what are they used for? Because each window can be changed to a lot of different types of windows, okay? So think of Blender as an OS that has windows, and in each window you can use an aspect of Blender, okay? And you can organize those windows depending on what you want to do. If you're working on a texture for a model, maybe you want a 2D image drawing thing on the side and a 3D model on the side. But if you're sculpting, maybe you want a full screen 3D view. So it depends on what do you want to do and how do you feel comfortable working. Because this is a little bit difficult at the beginning, the Blender guys and girls, what they did is these tabs on top, where they propose you a setup of windows for different tasks. But keep in mind that this is just a proposition, an idea on how you can manage to do sculpting. So if you click on sculpting here, you will have a setup of windows that is more or less designed for sculpting. No? A big 3D view, some buttons here so you can manage your settings and etc. If you're doing shading, sorry, this is slow in my computer here, then you have a different view, no? And you have a node view underneath to edit materials and a render view on top and some files here so you can drag images and stuff like that. So all of these setups are just a different way of disposing windows. It's not a different software. It's not that you cannot do sculpting if you are not in this tab. You can do sculpting in the normal tab, in the layout tab, if you like. But those are set up for you to start, let's say. Once you are a Blender user and you feel more comfortable, you start modifying your disposition of windows and you can save them. So you can load your own Blender each time differently, okay? Please, if you have questions, comments, please interrupt me. I feel very dumb talking and talking and talking and just seeing your eyes because I cannot even see your faces completely, so I don't follow if you're sleeping or you're interested or not. So try to help me understand you. Okay, so Windows in Blender, let me see my list. Windows system, screen types. So screen types, each window can have a lot of different types of window. If I choose in this window a 3D viewport, then suddenly I have the same that I have here, in this small window. So I can change here and go to outliner. That was a window that was previously here. And now it's the opposite as before. No? So depending on the work that you do, you choose one type of window. We're going to explore later, not all, but the more important types of windows that exist in Blender. Okay? Like this was the first setup. Okay, on the bottom, in the layout, that's, let's say, the first thing that you see when you start Blender. You have a 3D view on top. On the bottom, you have a timeline. Keep in mind that Blender is very focused on animation, not only modeling. Blender has a lot of features that we're going to cover, but it is mainly designed to do modeling and animation, mostly for 3D films, 3D animation, VFX, stuff like that. It's not a CAD software, okay? So if someone start criticizing Blender and you want to defend it, don't go through that path. Blender is not a CAD software. It will not compete with any of the CAD softwares that you have seen in the previous class. It is not designed from the roots to do parametric modeling or to do that kind of things. You can do it, and you can do it pretty well. In fact, I do all my designs and stuff in here, the ones that I cut in the laser, in the CNC, etc. I do it here. But You have to find a way to do it. It's not the same workflow that you will have, you know, in any of the other CAD tools. From my point of view, that's good because it breaks this linearity that of a workflow that normally takes you to the same place always. But it's a personal choice. No? Yeah. Let me pass you the mic and you can keep it there so you will pass it between you.
If you're going to do to have 3D character and also 3D object based in that character, what would be a good strategy to use? I don't know, if we use Blender to go with the mixture between different software.
Okay, let me go to my mic. I think there's not only one answer to that question, obviously, but what I try to do in this kind of classes in Fab Academy, and what I think we all try to do here in this type of courses like MDF and Fab Academy, is show you options. No? There's a lot of options, and there's not only one right way to do it. My personal opinion is that you have to choose the software based on what do you want to achieve. So if you said to me, I want to model a character and then 3D print it, where do you feel more comfortable modeling characters? Well, I will do it in Blender because I know Blender and Blender has a lot of tools to do that. So maybe that's a good option. To 3D print a character, what you need to do is, if you already have a mesh that you can export from this tool, you will use another tool to do the slicing and to 3D print. No? Blender has a lot of tools integrated for checking objects for 3D printing and stuff like that. So you can do it inside here, all of it. But do I recommend it or not? It depends a lot on what do you know, where do you feel comfortable. So my opinion is you need to try a lot of different softwares and try to choose them for good reasons and feel comfortable with them. And then you learn how to solve specific problems inside that software, even if it's not designed for that. No? So I can tell you let's say the official proper path to do that, but I prefer not to. I prefer you to find the path between softwares to find the right way. Later on the course, we're gonna have one class of Blender to work with big meshes, point clouds and stuff like that, in a way that you can clean them and prepare them inside Blender so you can 3D print them. Because it's a normal use for the kind of tasks that we do here in Fab Academy, and it's very useful for that. You can also do that in other tools, yeah, you can. So we try to keep balance between different tools so you can get a grasp of all of them and decide by yourself, okay? Okay, I was talking about personalization of your Blender. So here in the normal window, you have timeline, 3D view, list of objects, what is called the outliner, and the property windows. That's, let's say, the window where you are going to change stuff in your objects, in your tools, etc. And normally on the top, you have a menu. That's, in fact, a window, okay? The one that's on top. And it's a window, but it has specific characteristics, the same as the bottom one. I don't know the name of this bottom line in the normal software, but the one that tells you stuff that's happening right now. No? Then here on top, you have a couple of menus that can change, that allow you to change global things in Blender. It's important to understand that Blender is a model software. What does this mean is that the different tools that you have behave differently depending on the mode that you're working on, okay? You can be in edit mode. That means a mode to edit the inner parts of an object, of a mesh. You can be in object mode. That means a mode to edit objects themselves. You can be in scope mode. That's a mode where you can use scope tools on top of those objects or those meshes, okay? So you have, let's say, units of data, normally objects, points, edges, faces, etc. And you have tools, and those tools apply to the data depending on the mode that you are, okay? Here you can see a menu that's the mode, where you can select the mode. If you are in object mode and you grab a cube, you can move that cube, but you can not modify the inner parts of the cube. You can scale it, but you cannot do this, right? You cannot change that specific corner of the object. For that, you have to go into edit mode. And when you go into edit mode, you will see the inner parts of that cube, okay? We're gonna see those later, but it's just for you to grasp the get the idea, grab the idea of modality, okay? The same cube, the same set of tools, sometimes are more tools in one mode than in others, but different tools that are shared between modes, but they behave differently depending on the mode you are, okay? Well, let me keep here Blender and open this here, sorry. Okay, the 3D view is the most common view to be used in Blender. One of the difficult things in a 3D software is navigating a 3D view. Sometimes you lose more time getting the right point and working in the right view than really doing modeling stuff. In that matter, Blender, since the beginning, was designed to be a tool to be used with the keyboard and the mouse, not only the mouse. Normally, the newest tools push us more to the mouse thing, and Blender is more designed to have the left hand, well, depending on if you use your left or your right, but one hand on the keyboard and the other hand on the mouse, okay? Normally, that's the preferred way to work in. So, for example, the view is very easily changeable, as you can see, from side to top to perspective, etc., with the keyboard. You don't have to go here and click, okay, I want this view, because it's a lot less efficient and normally tends to be, you get more tired of doing this with the mouse always to just change stuff, no? So, for example, the views are normally mapped to the numpad in a keyboard. A parenthesis here. Blender is designed to be used mostly in workstations. Nowadays, we all have a laptop, but that was not common always. So, using a keyboard without the numpad with Blender is difficult. Okay, there are some tricks and some stuff that later we can review if you like, but I recommend you get a full keyboard and a real mouse if you're going to do 3D modeling. Don't try to do with the pad on the laptop and do, because you're going to suffer and you're not going to enjoy the process. Okay, so aligning views in Blender is as simple as understanding how they are mapped to the num block. And they are mapped normally with logic, you know? 7 is the top, 1 is the front, 3 is the side. So with 5, you can turn on and off perspective. You know? You can see isometric or perspective. The other 4 are to rotate in different directions. So you can navigate an object just with the keyboard very easily. Okay? This paradigm of using the keyboard to do stuff that normally we're used to do with the mouse applies normally all the way around in Blender. I want to move this cube. Instead of going here and select the move tool and grab this thing and drag it through the x-axis, I just keep my tool as a selection tool and click G from grab, X from x-axis and move, right? And you can do that very easily and very fast. And if I want to move my cube only 2 units, then I do grab X2. And I didn't touch my mouse. okay? And I move the cube 2 units in the x-axis to the right, okay? So I'm not going to go very deep into all of these tools, but you always have very different ways of inputting data to do modifications to a software, and Blender still keeps all of them to be used together. So I'm pushing on this subject because if you start using Blender only with your mouse, you're going to feel like it's, you feel dumb, like I have to go here and I have to do this, and then I didn't do it well. And if you learn from the beginning to use the keyboard, at the beginning you're going to feel a little bit strange, but after some time you're going to be like a fish swimming in a pool. No, it's very easy and very fast to use the keyboard and the mouse at the same time, and you go like this. Okay, it's just a personal recommendation, but try to use the keyboard as much as you can in this kind of software. Okay, so I'm going to cover very fast because we don't have too much time the type of windows that we have in Blender. Yep. It is in the document that I sent you, and you can see it. I linked one that's a little bit strange, but it's funny, and I think it's you can enjoy watching it and try to understand what they are doing there. But you can find a lot more classical cheat sheets on the internet if you just search for Blender cheat sheet. But this one is if you grab the logic of this guy, it's a nice one. It is linked on the document. But also keep in mind that if you find you search on DuckDuckGo for a Blender whatever, you will find answers as crazy because the community is very big and very sharing, let's say. No? Okay, sorry, here we go. So let's start with the 3D view. The 3D view is the most commonly used if you use Blender as a 3D modeler. Blender can be used also as a video editing, as a compositor, as a lot of things. We're going to cover them later, but 3D modeling is the first one that we're going to cover here. So in the 3D view, you obviously have a 3D view of your models, okay? It is normally just one window, but you can convert it to a classical 4 view with the perspective and the top, side, and front view. I recommend you to try to learn these shortcuts on the keyboard because it's very easy to model if with only one, and you have a really big 3D view that's a lot more comfortable to work in than 4 small views. On the left, you have the tool shelf, this one, that you can hide and show because as you have seen, everything is customizable here. So you have a small arrow here that if you click it, it will show up, or with the letter T, you can hide it and show it. This will show you the tools that you have depending on the mode that you have selected. In this case, we're in object mode, so we can modify objects. And we have some tools here. All those tools, normally, you can access them shortcuts to the keyboard. So if you're a power user, you normally ignore this stuff. But when you're starting, sometimes it's useful. You can also drag it, so it will show you a more descriptive title of the tool. So here you can go to rotate, and then you can rotate your cube here. But as I said to you before, you can also click rotate with the R key and rotate your cube. And if you just want to rotate it on the Z axis, click the Z axis and do it. Okay? I'm going to make a parenthesis about the 3D view to show you the workflow in terms of rotation and modifications on top of the object. When you execute a key like G to move an object, grab, you don't have to click anything in your mouse. And you move your mouse, and it's going to be, let's say, the object is stick to the mouse, okay? It's not that you have to drag with the button down. You are free to move, and you don't know how to finish your operation, right? Because it is moving, and how do I finish? So the paradigm in Blender is, if you click a left mouse now, you are confirming that you want to do that operation of moving. But if you click the right button, you cancel the operation, okay? So normally the idea is start the operation, do it, confirm or cancel it, okay? And in the do it, there's a lot of things that you can do. You can do grab, and you can type numbers to grab numbers, or you can type axis to constrain the movement to an axis, or you can try, for example, Shift C, and that means don't move in the Z axis, only in Y and Z, so you can keep your object in a plane. There's a lot of tricks like those. I'm not going to cover them, obviously, in this class, but just for you to get an idea that this flow is powerful if you learn how to use it. It's normally very different from other softwares, so a lot of people reject it at the beginning, but try to force yourself to use it for some days, because in my opinion, it's very powerful. Okay, just as an example of how different Blender used to be, now it's more similar to other software. Previously in Blender, you select objects with the right button, not with the left button. And everyone that started to use Blender for the first time was, how do I select this? I cannot select it, no? And they decided to change it for new people not to reject Blender on the first 5 minutes. But you can still change it on the settings and go back to right selection. There was reasons on why to use right selection, but since we are all used to use left selection, then they accepted as an imposition of the reality. Okay, so 3D view, tool on the left, properties on the right. You can show them or hide them with the N key, or you can see the small arrow here. You can click it, you will have properties here. These kind of menus, as you can see, have different tabs on the right, okay? It's a little bit overwhelming, I know. There's a lot of options for a lot of things. But the idea is that this panel is for you to change properties of stuff, properties of the item that you have. So instead of moving it by dragging the object, you can just say, I want this object to be in this coordinate, X, Y, and Z, or this rotation, or this scale, right? So you can change them by mouse, by keyboard, or by changing the value here. I want it to be 2.5 here, so that's it, okay? Dimensions, I want my object to exactly have this dimension on this axis, so I can change it directly there. Okay, so an object is a place where you put some data, and that place has some properties: rotation, scale, location, etc. But the data inside the object, where the vertex are located, etc., is inside the edit mode. Okay, I jumped to this because I was going to explain this menu here. This menu here will allow you to do a lot of things to the object, the model you're working on, but it depends on the mode, okay? And the first part of this menu is the mode. Object mode is the mode where you normally start. But if you want to modify some other stuff, you will change mode. You have edit mode. As I explained it before, it will help you edit the inner parts of a mesh, or depending on the object that you have selected, the inner parts of that object. If it is a vectorial curve, then you can edit the nodes, not the edge, etc. Sculpt mode, to do sculpting, okay? Vertex paint is a way to paint your objects based on the geometry data that can be used for different things, just to put colors, or also to say red is softer than blue. So if my object is going to behave like jelly, then it's going to be softer here than here, okay? When you do animation on characters and you want to bend an elbow, then you paint the object and you say this part is flexible and this part is rigid by painting, okay? Then weight paint was exactly what I was explaining for characters. Vertex paint is related to paint on top of vertices to use in different things. And texture paint. Texture paint will allow you to paint, let's say, la cáscara. How do you say that in English? Sorry? The surface of an object, exactly. Is not affecting the object itself, but like the envelope, no, of the object. So you're painting an image that's stick to the cover of the object, okay?
So texture is for surface and weight is for like
Weight is for the rigidity or flexibility of a model, and that exists independently because one of the most important tasks for animators is building rigs, let's say tools to animate a character. No? So you can do the model and then you have to do this to be able to animate properly a character. So since Blender has a very big user base for animators, that's there as an independent mode. Then you have normal menus. Obviously, it depends on the software which kind of menus you have, but everything related to the view, to selection. Selection in a 3D software can be very complex because you can have complex objects and you want to select just the vertices that are under these, etc. So there's a lot of things to select in different ways. And the object menu. This menu is very big and it has a lot of submenus, okay? I'm not gonna cover them, but there's a lot of tools there to work with the object. Now, one thing that happens a lot, it happens to me a lot, is that you don't remember where that tool was. The command to do this, I know more or less the name, but I don't remember where it is. And I can spend a lot of time searching for it. So they did this search tool, okay? So I want to do a bridge between vertices, or I have to be in edit mode to do a bridge, sorry. But I want to bridge two vertices, and I don't remember where, in which menu was that command. So I click F3, that's a search box, and start typing bridge, and then I find my tool, okay? Those are shortcuts, but are important when you're starting because you can lose half an hour searching for something that the teacher said and you cannot find. So hit F3 and type down whatever you remember about that tool, okay? As F3 is the search box. As you see, when tab is a key, it's a shortcut to change between object and edit mode because that change is very common when you're editing stuff. And as you can see, the tools on the left change completely. And I have selected the same object, but the tools are very different if you are in edit mode than if you are in object mode, okay? Keep in mind this model thing. The mode changes everything, the interface and the things that you can do, okay? So if you want to move a cube, don't go to edit mode and move it. Keep yourself in object mode and not here, okay? If you want to edit the inner parts and subdivide that face, then go to edit mode and select the vertex and subdivide them, right? So the task that you want to achieve depends on the mode and the interface also. Okay, so on the right, properties. I'm not going to cover all this. You can explore them later. On the document that that is linked for you, on the bottom, there's a lot of resources all over the document, but on the bottom, there's this link to Blender fundamental videos, okay? This is a page from the Blender Foundation, official, from videos that they have released for training. And this set of videos are short videos that will help you get into Blender. If you, in one afternoon or two, you can see all these videos and you will get a full idea of what I'm trying to push into 1 hour in this class, okay? It's also in YouTube, but the Blender Foundation has a specific page that you can access without ads and whatever, okay? So, properties, tools, menu, and you have another menu on the top right that has to do with how you can see things in the 3D view. Yes? This one? With the N key, you can show it or hide it, but remember that when you see these small little arrows anywhere, you can just click them and, oh, I have a new menu that I didn't know existed. You can just drag it to make it bigger or smaller, okay? These buttons here are just aids. If you don't know how to move, you can just grab the hand and do a pan. You can just go to the camera view. You can drag on top of this and move your 3D view. When you're on a laptop, this is very useful because you don't have normally an easy middle mouse, middle button mouse, etc. Okay? All of this can be customized, hidden, depending on how do you want to work. I'm showing Blender as the default view that they show to you before you customize anything. Here, you have different menus. For example, object visibility and selectability. So you can select this object, but not the other, and this is visible, but not, etc. Okay? Menu for the gizmos on the viewport. If you want to always see this, the small arrows to move an object or not to move it, then you can turn them on and off here and select which ones you want active or not, okay? Then how do you view an object with an X-ray view or not? You see what's behind it or not. And here you have another full menu on how it is rendered on the viewport. So you see it with light, with shadows, with whatever, okay? It's obviously complex and it has a lot of things. I'm not gonna cover them right now, but here you manage how do you view stuff, okay? And on the side of that menu, you can see these 4 little spheres where you can choose, see things on wireframe, on flat thing, some type of middle point render or a full render. I'm not going to activate full render because my computer doesn't have a graphic card. Well, it has an integrated one and it will become too slow. But if you have a good graphic card, you can work on render mode permanently and it's nice if you like seeing stuff as is going to be looked as when it's finished. Okay. That's the 3D view. And as you can see, we didn't cover neither 10% of the 3D view. Okay, so I'm going to jump to the next one. Obviously, it's gigantic, but it's very easy to work just using 5 tools and ignoring the rest. Okay, so you're going to learn and find buttons little by little. Don't try to understand what everything does since the beginning. Okay, on the top, we have the menu, the big menu, where you have the normal file stuff, save, help, render window, menu, etc. Everyone knows what's a render, no? In this kind of lexic around 3D software, no? I think there's a lot of not so sure faces. So a render is just taking a photograph, okay? So you can set up materials, lighting, a lot of things, and you can see your model like you're seeing it here, like a very simple, or you can get a really cool image if you set up everything well. But normally calculating those images takes time, depending on your hardware. So you normally do the rendering when you finish, or at certain points, not permanently. Nowadays, there's a lot of people that work in render mode because hardware is beginning to allow it. But depends on your setup and your what are you used to do. Okay, help. Help are normally just links to web page, but as I said to you before, there's a lot of resources in this page that I linked you. And here are the Blender manual. Here, that's normally very complete. You can read a lot of stuff there. Is on the web, but that's a good thing because it is updated on a daily basis. There is a developer wiki. If you are into modifying stuff in Blender, then you go there. There is a Blender API, Python API for people that want to write stuff into Blender. We're going to have a class later in Flow Academy on how to interface real world stuff with Blender. For example, how you can connect your Arduino and your sensor to Blender to modify a scene depending on the temperature. Or the other way around, how can I move my CNC when I do some stuff inside Blender? No? So how can you connect in and out? You can do that because you can have access to Python, okay? In Blender, you can be controlled completely by Python. Okay, going back here, menu on the top. On the right, normally you have two windows. The top one is called Outliner, and it will show you everything in your scene in a list way. You can edit stuff here, modify here. For example, here's my cube, right? And if I open my cube, I see the data that is inside my object, the mesh data. And if I click this, I automatically go to edit mode because now I'm editing the inners of my object. And here I go to my object and I can edit my object itself, okay? The material of the object, etc. Each part, each entity that you will find here has different contents and different properties. Here you can also modify the visibility, for example. I can turn off an object, I can make it selectable or not, etc. There's a lot of different things that you can do here around the object. But it's a more less visual way of managing objects. Sometimes it's very useful. When you have a lot of objects, it's very useful. On the bottom of this right side, you have I think it's called property windows still. Yeah, properties. This window is the one that you're going to be clicking the most after the 3D view, because here you can modify a lot of things. And here are all the tools that you will use to modify all your stuff in the 3D view. So on the left, you have these tabs that only have an icon per tab. And each of those tabs can have one or multiple sub-menus with one or multiple sub-menus with 1 or 100 buttons, okay? Don't try to explore them all right now. It's just for you to know that they are there, and depending on what you want to achieve, just go to the specific point that you remember that you need to access. If you try to cover all of them, you're going to get bored really easily. Okay? But, for example, modifiers are a way to edit objects in Blender in a parametric way. And here you can select your object, go to modifiers, and make an array of objects, right? And say I want 100 cubes aligned here, okay? And I have my 100 cubes there. And stuff like that is inside here, okay? There is a lot of stuff. Here you can make fire, make smoke, apply physical simulations to your object. You can make your object made of cloth. You can modify the material that is assigned to your object. You can set up your scene. Which units are you using? Which is the real size of your object? You can modify how the view is shown. If it is shown in with different characteristics, you want to see the names of your objects, the edges, whatever. Okay? I'm just covering them like crazy for you to get the idea that there's a lot of stuff here. Textures, materials, mesh and geometry, constraints. If you want to constrain an object to not move in one direction because it is part of a mechanical system that only allows him to rotate, you can set up a constraint here that forces the object to just rotate on the z-axis, stuff like that. Physics, particles, modifiers, object, material, material surface, the scene, the renders, the output of your renders, and how is this one called? Render properties. The render is in fact divided in 3 different tabs because it is complex and too big. On the bottom, you have a timeline. Maybe that's not interesting now, but it can be very interesting because animating can be used also for modeling, for example. You can animate something a long time and then use it as a specific point in time with a different geometry because the geometry is modified by some parameter. No? You can do a lot of stuff. Everything in Blender can be animated, okay? Animation is based on this idea of keyframes. So you go to a point in time and you set one parameter and you set that parameter fixed in that point in time. Then you go to another point in time and you change the parameter and set it there as fixed. And then Blender will calculate the middle points, okay? I know that if you already work with the animation in any kind of software, it's the same concept, but the idea here is that you can insert keyframes in everything, okay? So obviously you can just say, I want to insert a keyframe in the location of my cube in the frame 1. And you can see there, this small block is a keyframe. And I can go to the frame 40, move my object and insert a keyframe again, and then my object will move, right? But you can apply that to the amount of cubes that your array has grown. So you can start growing from 1 to 100 in this amount of time, etc. So everything that you can find here, you can assign keyframes to it, okay? I just assign a keyframe to 100 here. And if I go here and I change my array to 0 and I insert a keyframe in that value, with the letter I, you can insert keyframes to any button menu in Blender, then you will see that it's not only moving, it's shrinking. The objects are disappearing frame by frame, okay? Animation in Blender is a full system that will take us several months to cover, so I'm just putting it out there. You can add time-dependent modifications to anything inside Blender, okay? That's why the timeline is here. If you don't like it, you can just right-click here and say join and remove it. And then you have a big 3D view, okay? If you don't want to do animation, you can just ignore it. Now, as you can see on the top, we have modeling, sculpting, etc. So each of those is more or less designed for you to do one task. And all of those are just combinations of type of windows in different dispositions. So I'm going to check here. 3D viewport, we already covered. Image editor. I think I don't need to cover this. The name explains itself, no? You have a kind of a Photoshop inside Blender. Obviously, it's not as big as Photoshop, but it's a nice image editor where you can do a lot of stuff, okay? So you can load an image here and start painting, editing. You can use a lot of different tools to edit images here. UV editor, it's an editor to do UV mapping. Maybe a lot of people doesn't know what it is, but it's just how an image will be mapped on top of a 3D model, okay, as an envelope. That's very common when you do models for rendering. Compositor. Blender has a node-based compositor. For people that have worked or done at some point in their life VFX composition, there's a lot of other tools. Nuke, for example, is a normal tool that's used in the industry today. There's a lot of tools to do composition. Blender is pretty powerful doing composition. Composition means, imagine a Photoshop on steroids, but also a long time, okay? You can apply and modify 2D images, but you can do those modifications to change over time. So you can do an animation in Blender, and the render output, you can plug it into a node spaghetti stuff, where you can modify that render and change all stuff in that render, or put it on top of a photograph or a movie, or modify normals, or do a lot of stuff via node, okay? If you remember at the beginning of the class, I showed you a developer blog, and they were talking in that subject about everything nodes. So they are implementing this interface of nodes to everything in Blender. So you can start already doing animation with nodes, so you can calculate how things are going to be moved by parametric stuff that you insert by node. And they are developing already modeling by nodes, okay? So that will give us a lot of power around parametric modeling in Blender. But it's not yet there, at least not in the stable release. It's going to be there in the next months, maybe. Then compositor, texture node editor, you can edit all the textures that you're using in your model in a node interface like this one also. Shader editor is the same idea of the nodes, but applied to the shader, the material that your object has assigned. It is reflective, it is metal, it is transparent, it's red, it's blue. All the properties of the material can be modified by nodes with this window. Video sequencer. Showing only one video sequencer is maybe strange, because, but let me, I think they have one. This is compositing, scripting, rendering, shading. Oh, before they had one that was video editing, maybe. Yeah, here, new video editing. So this is a setup of windows designed to do video editing. You can do serious video editing in Blender. You can work really on editing videos here. And as you see, this setup is just the window I just showed to you, the video editing window, where you can drag as if maybe you have used this Mac software, the famous one. Someone can remember it, no? Well, in Windows, a lot of people use Adobe, Premiere, Final Cut is the Mac one, no? This editing kind of stuff, you can do it here, and you will show here your videos, drag them, cut them, organize them, etc. And here in the render view, you will see your movie. And as always, you have these property windows here to modify stuff, etc. Okay? Coming back to here. So video sequencer or video editing, movie clip editor is also related to editing videos, but it's a different editor to edit a specific video, not to composite several videos. All of those are windows for general use. Then we have windows for animation, timeline, graph editor, so you can edit the curves on how things are changing along time. You can have a dope sheet, so you can organize based on small blocks all your keyframes. You can set up drivers that modify behaviors during time. And you have a window to do non-linear animation. That means, for example, you can package some behavior. You animate a guy scratching his head, and then you can save that as a scratching head. And then you can edit scratching head and scratching nose and whatever, and just use them as actions, etc. Okay? Scripting. Blender has, as you can imagine, a text editor. You can edit text inside Blender. You can write your programs inside Blender, your Python programs, or you can write your thesis here if you like. No? As you can see, Blender becomes also almost an operative system. No? It has tools for doing almost everything. You have a Python console. So you have an interactive console for those that already use Python. I think every one of you have done some classes on Python. No? Well, you will. It's an interpreter, so you can do some commands, and it will answer you. So you can interact with a Python interpreter that also controls Blender from a console. Info window, the name says everything. And then to manage data, you have outliner, this one that I already explained. Properties, the bottom one with all the properties. You have obviously a file browser where you can check your files. And you have preferences window. Okay, this is a big window with a lot of stuff that you can edit. The only thing that I'm going to mention here is the add-ons settings are here. You will find, if you start searching a little bit about Blender, you will find a lot of reference to an add-on. And here is where you need to go to enable or install an add-on in Blender. Okay? Okay, I think I haven't covered everything, but the time is out. So I'm going to try to make a short resume. Sorry, my English is going down while the class advances. So, Blender, free software, 3D modeling, video editing. You can do compositing, you can write your programs, you can 3D print or produce models for 3D printing or for CNC or for whichever task you want to do here on the Fab Lab. But you can also do animation, materials, physical simulation. So there's a lot of different parts on Blender. Okay? It's a software that's based on the idea of customization. You can build your own Blender as you like. It's based on a model behavior, depending on the mode that the program is set up, is how you can interact with it, and the tasks that you can do change depending on the mode, sorry. It's good to learn Blender using a keyboard and a mouse, not only a mouse, and more if you intend to use Blender for modeling stuff that needs to be precise in terms of dimensions. Use the keyboard. You can sculpt, for example, do a 3D scan with a Kinect. That's an exercise that you for sure are going to do. And sculpt on top of that, convert that to a mesh properly, cover it, and then sculpt and fix stuff on top of it. And then you can do it as if you were painting with a brush. No? Completely a different approach to modeling, but also very useful depending on the type of project we're working on. And at the end, you can then dot with very nice images or videos of your models if you learn how to work with materials, with lighting, with cameras, and with composition. So, as you can see, it's a full suite of a lot of different tasks. My recommendation is choose it, if you want to try it, choose it for one task and start learning little by little that task. And then expand your knowledge to another one. Don't try to cover everything. It's too much. It's normal that Blender has power users that doesn't know anything about a full part of Blender, because they are very good modeling or sculpting, but they don't know nothing about composition. So they ignore completely those windows, and they can work without knowing anything about those windows. Okay? So keep in mind that you can segment Blender to be a program just for your task without knowing the rest. And if you want to start learning a little bit more, so you can, and you like what you've seen today, I recommend you go through the videos, the introductor, I don't know how they were called. I show you this fundamental videos, and that will show you a big picture, more detailed than today's class, about all the features. Okay? So please, comments, questions, comments around what you have seen today. Let me pass you the microphone.
Yeah, I have one question because I've been working with finite element modeling a long time ago, and I was always surprised by the computation time it requires and how fast in comparison this kind of software can work. Or like, for example, just for a drop of water falling on the floor with finite element modeling, it can be 1 week of computation. And here you showed that guy who was I don't know, working with a pillow, like crazy stuff.
Yeah.
And how does it work and how?
There's a lot of tricks and hacen trampa, say it in Spanish, because when you do a simulation, an FX simulation for a movie, you don't need it to be perfectly physically correct. You just need to be convincing, right? So normally these softwares, these kind of softwares, use libraries around simulation that are very optimized in terms of fast response, because as an artist, you need to be able to interact with the simulation in a way, in a more fluid way to get nice results. And you are not so much worried about the precision of the simulation, okay? I think that's the big difference between a software that's designed to do properly those calculations or the approach of just doing simulations for showcase. But I'm not expert on the subject, and maybe I'm wrong, but I think that's the main reason around it. Okay. Anything else? What do you think? Is someone interested in continue learning Blender, or is not what, it doesn't fit your idea? It does? Can, just as a matter of, for me to get an idea, how much of you will be interested in learning more about Blender as a tool for this kind of things? Almost everyone. Okay. Great. So,
Sorry, an extra question.
yeah.
When we do technical documentation, when you create with a 3D card and if you want to send the drawings to a company to make it, there is this kind of possibility?
Inside Blender, no. No.
No?
No. Inside Blender, there are no tools to do technical documentation, no. Because the origin of Blender is very far away from technical, from engineering work, let's say. Obviously, you can link Blender with other tools. A lot of people do it, and it's doable, no? But it's not integrated inside. Maybe there are some add-ons that can help you do stuff, no? But not as a core tool for Blender. But the good thing about Blender is that forks are happening and that add-ons are being more powerful every day. So communities, for example, communities that are more linked to Fab Labs, for example, push more into Blender as a CAD tool and push for add-ons to do CAD-CAM and generate G-code for CNCs, etc. So they grow even if the main Blender Foundation is not interested in developing that. So what I think in this kind of questions, the problem is not that the software doesn't fit you with tools that you're used to use, but the communities imagine how this software can be adapted to a specific workflow and trying to push resources, programmers, developers, etc., to implement those. Because at the end, since it is open source, any kind of effort in any direction will remain there. And normally Blender Foundation is very open. So if someone in an organized way develops something that can help to go or to use Blender in that direction, I'm sure they will welcome it and integrate it as a part of Blender. So obviously, it depends on the places and the communities that Blender has grown, the strengths are there. And engineers normally work in a company and they have corporate software and they buy software from another company and they use that. Universities use more open source software in this kind of stuff, but Blender is still far away of those communities. No? So I think one of the possible good things to do in Blender is try to take it closer to those communities. And it's happening, I think, in some subjects, for example, in the Romy project, that there's a lot of work in simulation of plants, on the growing of plants. They are using Blender to do a lot of the work on they scan to do phenotypes of plants, and they use Blender to do the modeling and to generate the models that mathematically were generated by their algorithms, etc. So it's slowly happening, but it's not already a tool for engineers, let's say. Okay, well, if no one else wants to say nothing, I think we're done for today. I hope that we can do the next classes in a more close way. I don't know, I don't feel very comfortable in this thing with microphones and you far away, etc. But if not, maybe we get used to this. But we're going to cover at least another 2, maybe 3 classes of Blender during the course for specific tasks related to 3D printing, to interacting with electronics and sensors and stuff, and related to that one, I'm not sure if we're going to do it or not in Blender, but related to 3D scanning and 3D printing and clouds, point clouds. Okay? So, see you on the next one. Thank you very much. Give me just 1 second that I close.